Welcome back to The Look and Sound of Leadership, an ongoing series of executive coaching tips designed to help you be perceived in the workplace the way you want to be perceived. I'm Tom Henschel, your executive coach, and today we're talking about acting on the corporate stage. Miranda was a well-known creative artist when a global entertainment company hired her as a creative director. Her transition from artist to executive had been received with warm, if not full-throated, reviews. Her team was doing all right, but it could have been better. Her pitches to the division president were good. They could have been better. Her recruitment of creative talent was fair to middling. It certainly could have been better. Collaboration with her peers was okay, could have been better. She said, I think sometimes they blow me off a little, that they see me as the crazy artist. Is that the role you're in here? I asked. Crazy artist? Do you mean, do they cast me in that role, or do I cast myself in that role? Yes, I answered with a smile. Oh, of course. Okay, so do they cast me there? Sometimes, yeah, I think they do. Yeah, do I cast myself? Well, every now and then I turn it on, but most of the time, no, I am not playing the crazy artist. So what are you playing? I asked. Golly, I don't know. I've never thought about it like a role I'm playing. She cocked her head and looked at me. Is this a thing? Well, it is for me, I said. It's a thing I call acting on the corporate stage. She laughed. Well, of course, with you, it would be acting. She and I had traded histories. I said, acting on the corporate stage starts with this idea. Behavior matters. It counts. We feel each other's behavior all day long, and it matters. But people forget that. They forget their behavior is on display. They forget they've taken on a role, and that role is being played out in public. She said, and you're not talking about a role like a position like my role here as Vice President Creative Director. Well, no, not necessarily, no, I said. It could be a role like crazy artist, right? She asked. Well, it could be, I said. Or what else? What other roles are there? I mused. The eager young assistant, brilliant, hardworking, willing, self-promotional, or the world-weary, seen it all before subject matter expert. She laughed, like character descriptions in a script. Acting on the corporate stage, I nodded. She wondered, do we know we're playing those character descriptions on a corporate stage? Some people do, I said. But the role is there whether we know it or not, she said, with the hint of a question. Because behavior matters, I affirmed. She nodded, saying, you know those words that kept repeating themselves in my 360? Before our coaching had started, I'd created a 360-degree feedback report about Miranda. Page after page after page had verbatim comments from her respondents. Over the course of pages, 3 words had repeated themselves. I listed those words now in answer to her question. Creative, strong, and visionary. Yeah, she said, it's interesting to think that my behaviors summoned up those words, but I didn't know I was doing it. It's like I was doing automatic writing. She mimed her arm, taking on a life of its own, scrolling through the air. It is interesting, I agreed. You know how those 3 words cropped up all through your report? Well, that's the norm, Miranda. I see dozens of those 360 reports every year, and in the vast majority of them, words get repeated. And we have like close to 200,000 words in English, so when a single descriptor word starts getting repeated, that's noteworthy. That person has crafted a role for herself, and we all do. Whether we know it or not, said Miranda. And then, I bet they're not always the nicest words, are they? No, not always, I said. People write themselves all sorts of roles. Okay, she said, so if I wanted to go from automatic, unconscious writing of my role, and I wanted to start writing my role consciously with intention, how would I start? I said, well, one way I like to start is with a name. So this role you're playing, what's her name? Isn't it Miranda? She asked. Well, if she's named Miranda, you'll have a hard time distinguishing her from all the other Mirandas running around inside you. Oh, you mean like Mom Miranda, Wife Miranda, that's what you mean? Right, I said. She got a big smile and said, well, then, her name has got to be Andy. I made up this little girl Andy when I was at camp one year. It was the year everyone was jumping from high places, and I hated it. But I didn't want to stay on the ground either, so I did it. And when I did it, I imagined I was this girl I made up, and her name was Andy. She could jump out of the barn. I couldn't. Whoa, Andy sounds brave, I said. Oh, yeah, she was. Wait, she is. It sounds like we're bringing the role named Andy back to life, right? Well, sure, I said. So great. Talk to me about Andy, who used to jump out of barns and is now a creative director. Yeah, what's she like these days? Well, she's creative and strong and visionary. We know that about her already, she said. Then, with a regretful shake of her head, she said, well, I can tell you what she's not. She's not shooting sparks like a superstar. She's not lighting the world on fire. And you'd like her to be? I asked. Well, you bet. So I asked, what would Andy be like if she were shooting sparks and setting the world on fire? Well, she'd be faster and crisper and a lot more efficient. Okay, I said. So Andy is creative, strong, and visionary. And now we know she's fast, crisp, and efficient. So let's imagine something. I took a breath, and so did she, and then she closed her eyes, and I said, picture yourself driving into the parking lot tomorrow morning. You put the car in park, you turn the car off, you gather everything up, you open the door, but who gets out isn't you, it's Andy. How would that be different? Her eyes still closed. She smiled at the image. Warmly, she said, I don't know exactly how it's different, but it is. She's more energetic, I think, more pumped. So now, I said, picture energetic Andy walking in, saying hi, doing all those morning rituals, all those little conversations. How is Andy different from you? She's calmer. She's not so frantic. There's a lot of intention there. Miranda stopped speaking, and so did I. After a moment, she opened her eyes. That was powerful. I stayed silent. She said, it's a bit chicken and egg, isn't it? How so? I asked. Does Andy's behavior come first, and that creates the calmer, intentional role? Or, since I'm intentionally imagining this calmer role, does that create the behavior? Does it matter? I asked. Well, I don't know. Maybe, if I ever want to do this again. Well, you can always repeat what we just did, I said. Which was what? First you name the role, then you imagine the role. What do you want the role to be? What do you not want the role to be? Then you imagine what it would look like, and that comes out as behavior. And feelings, too, she added. There were strong feelings with it. Changing tone, I said, I see why you might call it the chicken and egg argument. It's a bit like an old argument actors have among themselves. Do you build a character from the inside out or the outside in? And which is which? So, imagine we're talking about Andy. You say she's brave. Well, brave starts on the inside. It's going to be an inside out. Why does it start on the inside? Because brave is not an action. You can't act brave. It has to be on the inside. So the inside out theory says that if you can truly put brave on your inside, it will ultimately change your outside, how you walk into a meeting, how often you speak up, how fast you talk. Words like brave work from the inside out. She held up a finger and said, Suppose I want to add new words, words like energetic and crisp. Are those inside or outside? Both those words could be outside words because they can be actions. You can act energetic. You can act crisp. So you could start with them on your outside as behavior. With the intention of making them second nature someday, right? She asked. Right, I said. You know, this could be completely crazy making, she said. In what way? I asked. You're telling me I need to be conscious of being Andy on the corporate stage from the time I get out of my car until I get back in at the end of the day? Well, I don't know if I can be Andy all day long. I mean, not that it wouldn't be great, it would be great, but I just don't think I can do it. Oh, I'm sure you're right, Miranda. No one can, not at first. That's why it's helpful to have a name as a trigger. When you suddenly remember, whoop, I'm on stage, having a name to snap back to, that can really help. She was quiet, considering, eyes down. And then she said, I'd like to do this. I'd like to take on the role of Andy, be aware of myself on the corporate stage. I stayed silent. She looked up and said, Before, I asked you if people know they're taking on a role. You said some do. Who are you talking about? Who knows they're taking on a role? Sensing she was going to join these ranks, I looked at her and said, People who are behaving consciously. People who take responsibility for their actions, whether those actions were intentional or not. Those people know they've taken on a role. She took in a breath and smiled. I like the sound of that. Let's give that a shot. Miranda discovered that acting on the corporate stage consciously, with intention, cuts an accelerated path to the look and sound of leadership. The point of this episode was to introduce you to a phrase that may be new to you, but in my life, it's probably 20 years old. And I was so surprised to find out that I had never really focused on it in all these executive tips, all these years. I was surprised because acting on the corporate stage used to be my branding phrase before my branding phrase became the look and sound of leadership. I used to talk about it all the time. And I want to tell you why the phrase originally occurred to me all those years ago. When I first started consulting, the world of work was a complete mystery to me. I had never been around an office. Sound stages, oh sure, and movie sets, no problem. Theaters, big, small, sure, knew my way around all those places. But truly, I had never worked one day in an office. I had no idea what to expect. And a lot of what I saw was just plain old bad behavior. And to be honest, I was a little shocked. I would think to myself, don't these people know they're in public? To me, work came with serious obligations. You can have your problems, but the work is public. If you show up, you have to put your problems aside and do the work. The work was always taking precedent over everything else. That was my ethic from show business. Are you old enough to remember the THX identity that used to show in movie theaters before the movies? And there was something fantastic to look at, and then it said, the audience is listening. Well, my version of that is, the audience is watching. The audience is every person you interact with at work, from the security guard to your boss's boss's boss. In a minute, I'm going to give you an incredibly simple breakdown of how to achieve acting on the corporate stage. But before I do, I want to tell you something else, and it's about you. You were on my mind recently because I just attended my very first conference about podcasting. Do you know Dave Stachowiak? I hope Dave Stachowiak is in your podcast feed every Monday. He's the host of Coaching for Leaders podcast. You should be listening. Well, Dave turned me onto this conference, and thank you, my friend, because I would never have known about it if it hadn't been for you. So why am I mentioning this podcast convention? Oh my. Well, 3 reasons. First, man, Wow, there is a lot of commerce around podcasting. Everybody has something to sell. And it made me double down on a commitment I made to all of you many years ago. I will not have advertising on this show. I could. I get approached all the time, but it's just not why I'm doing this podcast. And look, I have no objection to commerce. I'm all for commerce. I just don't want it here on this podcast. So that's number one. Number two, podcasting is exploding. Whoa. I mean, now there's not that much data out there about it yet because it's still pretty new. But what is known is that you, as a podcast listener, you are part of this fast growing population. Fantastic. It's so great. And, for me, I've been doing it so long. It's so exciting. It's great. One thing that they talked about over and over and over at this conference was about getting to know your listening audience. I heard the way some podcasters are extremely involved with their listeners, and it made me realize, I don't really know a whole lot about most of you. Some of you, yes. Some of you write me emails. We get to know each other a little bit that way. Some of you become clients. I certainly get to know you really well then. Some of you write reviews. Oh my goodness, I'm in your debt. Thank you so much. But all of those people are a very slender slice of the listeners. So now, after hearing over and over about the benefits of getting to know your audience, I'm really thinking about this. And by the way, it occurs to me the benefits are on both sides, right? I mean, as I get to know you better, it's more likely I'll deliver what's meaningful to you. Everybody wins. So the question is, how will I get to know you? I'm not sure yet. Most podcasters simply create an online survey. They invite listeners to complete it. I might do that. Don't know. Haven't thought about it that far yet. But I have gotten very curious to know who you are, and I hope that can happen. So that was number two, reason why I'm talking about the podcast convention. That was getting to know you. Number three is about other podcasts. Wow, man. There are so many podcasts out there now. Oh my gosh. It's extraordinary. So it's hard to find stuff. And I want to tell you about two interviews that I have done on other shows that I think are worth listening to for different reasons. So there's one that's new. It's called Everyday Innovators. And the podcaster is Chad McAllister. Chad created his podcast for product managers. It's very specialized and interesting and in-depth, and it's great. He himself, Chad, has been a product manager, and now he's a professor. He's a great interviewer, very detail-oriented, and we had a big scope for our conversation, but he heard me talk a little bit about the sorting and labeling tool, and it just grabbed his attention. You can hear it when he suddenly goes, click, and he wants to know more about it. And so we did this amazing, deep, detailed dive into the sorting and labeling tool. Look, what I know is that a whole bunch of you reach out to me all the time and ask for the sorting and labeling PDF. It is one of my most requested PDFs. And there is an episode of The Look and Sound of Leadership called Sorting and Labeling. But Chad and I, boy, we really deconstructed the tool. If you want to get better at that tool, give it a listen. And I think you know that my belief, strong belief, is that sorting and labeling is one of the core skills for achieving the look and sound of leadership. So Everyday Innovator, episode 137. So there was a second interview I wanted to tell you about. This one is old. It's from several years ago. It's on the podcast called Fatherhood 360 with David Wissore. I have always loved this interview because it brought out such a different side of me. It's certainly a side I don't bring to the look and sound of leadership. David's intention with his podcast is to find out where parenting influences leadership and vice versa. And I ended up telling some very personal, very vulnerable stories that I've never told anywhere else. And frankly, I would love to share them with you. They were very meaningful to me, and I'd love for you to hear them. If you want to hear the interview and you're listening in real time, there's a link on the Essential Communications homepage that'll take you right to that episode. If you're listening later, it's Fatherhood 360, episode 11. So that's the three things about podcasting and the convention and you. Now, back to acting on the corporate stage. Acting on the corporate stage is a skill to be played with. If you want to play with this skill, start with this question. Who am I at work? So here's what you do. You picture yourself sitting up in the balcony of a theater, and you are looking down onto the stage, and on that stage is you at work. Who are you? What adjectives just came to your mind? What feeling words just came to your mind? Make note of those words. Don't dismiss them, because those words form the basis for the descriptor you're going to create. So remember those words. And what about a name? Give that person down there on the stage a name. And now you get to be the writer. You get to be the director. So now you get to imagine. It's 5 years from now, and that person down there on the stage has gotten recognition, and that person has gotten advancement and is expanding. What do you want that person down there on the stage to be like? What words leap to mind? Those words, that name, that can become a mantra. So you're gathering up your things to go to that meeting. Don't be you. Be the name you gave that person. And remember those descriptor words. Carry that person consciously for as long as you can. 30 seconds, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. Just do it. Build the muscle. You'll get better at it. What happens when you really adopt the belief that you are an actor on the corporate stage? Some things get easier. New things become obvious. Old things may go out of style. It gives you a new lens to look through. I encourage you, give it a try. You already are an actor on the corporate stage. Believe it. I hope this concept is new enough so that it's interesting to you, but I also hope it echoes with you. Look, after all, acting on the corporate stage is ultimately about how you're perceived in the workplace. And that's why these executive coaching tips exist, right? I mean, there's an entire category in the archive called perception, how you perceive yourself. There are also 2 other categories called perception, how you're perceived, and perception, how you perceive others. There are so many episodes that fall into those categories. But if you're thinking about how you perceive yourself and acting on the corporate stage, 4 others episodes that are particularly related are act as if. And by the way, the final paragraph of that tip has the words acting on the corporate stage. Act as if, creating new behaviors, self-awareness and self-management, and the mindful executive. Go, browse, help yourself. The archive is at the Coaching Tips tab at the Essential Communications website, essentialcomm.com, essentialcomm with 2 M's. That's it for me. It is sure nice to be thinking about you. Always nice to be in touch with you. Until next time, I'm Tom Henschel. Thanks so much for listening.